get a good picture.
Jolly good. Everybody sitting comfortably? I trust you all enjoyed your lunch today. We now have a very good speaker, I will say. Those of us that have seen David before know his talks are very interesting and thought-provoking. And today he's doing us a special favour that I asked him to do it without PowerPoint, because there's so many of us that most wouldn't be able to see the screen. So he has quite a repertoire of talks, as you all know, and he's very kindly sort of put an amalgam of those together, and it's entitled Aviation, the Mysteries and the Realities. So I hand you over to Captain David Henderson.
Thank you very much, Brian. Is that working okay? Is the sound system working okay? Yeah. Fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be back here at, with all three Probus clubs all at once, 3 for the price of 1. I'm really, really impressed. I spend a lot of time at sea on cruise ships doing similar talks to this nowadays, and I've been talking to a few of the members who are avid cruisers. And I have to say, talking to our Probus clubs compared to speaking on the ships, this is like talking to the youth club. You think I'm joking? I am not. I usually reckon that it's a good sign if at the end of 20 minutes or so, half the room is still awake. If half are still awake, I'll keep going until the other half are asleep, and then I'll sit down and shut up. So if you want to go away early, just sit there and shut your eyes, and I'll probably shut up a bit earlier. Those of you who do manage to stay, who actually do manage to catch 40 winks, will probably be woken at the end by the thunderous applause. Don't be alarmed. Don't be alarmed by this. So what I'm going to do today is just have a look at various topics within the airline business, where I spent, well, 40 years altogether in flying in various shapes or forms. And what I carry up here in this rat-infested maze that I call a brain are little truths, little anecdotes, little behind-the-scenes bits of knowledge, and some downright lies about the airline industry in general. Now, I know that we've got a few pilots in the house with us today, so would you like to put their hands up just so I can see what I'm up against? 1, 2, 3, 3. Is that all? 4. I thought it 5. Sorry, I thought it was more than that. Oh, I was getting a bit 6. 7. Oh, here we go. There we go. I knew it was going to be a cat somewhere. Because the answer to that question, which I also ask on the ships, and it's amazing the number of hands that go up when I'm on the ship, especially on the American cruise lines, the number of people who are actually pilots in one shape or another. The answer to that question determines what I can get away with telling you, basically. So it probably won't be too many lies today. I'll try and keep it fairly factual for you. I am employed by the cruise lines at vast expense to put people off flying. So that they'll go back and spend their money on cruise ships rather than spending their summer holidays sitting in Terminal 5 waiting for their flight, or the cabin crew, or the baggage loaders, whoever it might be, to turn up and maybe go to work. But anyway, on that sort of situation, I'm given probably between 7 and 8 talks, and the cruise director just gives me carte blanche to talk about what I like. Now, I have been known in the past to stray into the realms of non-political correctness, shall we say. Now, in an all-male audience, I'll probably get away with this. But when we come to talking about cabin crew, my girlfriend always tells me, she said, the trouble with you is, you don't know where the line is until you have already overstepped it. Which, in a lot of cases, happens to be true. Now, one difference, of course, between speaking in public here and speaking to you when I'm sitting in my little cockpit on the aeroplane there, is that I am isolated from you on board the aeroplane and you can't come and hit me. Whereas here, it's quite frightening standing up in front of people after all these years. Now, in the cockpit or the flight deck, it's not really called that if you've got an all-lady crew, of course. Do you know what it's called if you've got an all-lady crew? It's called the box office. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the welcome on board from the aircraft, you get this voice of God coming from the overhead hat rack there, and this terribly plummy British Airways captain will come on and he'll say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the captain speaking. My name is Captain Nigel Camberley Golf Course." Because they're all called Nigel. Did you notice that in British Airways? Every pilot is called Nigel. And they've all got double-barrel names. So it'll be Camberley Golf Course, or Waitrose Car Park, or Sainsbury Swimming Pool, something like that. They have all these wonderful, wonderful names. Now, you're sitting on board, waiting for the flight to depart. The first thing you'll hear from me, apart from this is Captain Nigel Camberley Golf Course, is, "I do apologise for the delayed departure to your flight this morning." Almost invariably. Yes, because always, somebody, somewhere is going to be on strike. If it's not us, it'll be the cabin crew. If it's not us or the cabin crew, it's going to be the ground handlers, the caterers, air traffic control, the refuelers, the ground engineers, the check-in staff, immigration, customs. It only takes one of those to go on strike, and we become a very fragile industry. We are so interdependent on each other for the success of our mission. My secret, when explaining the delay, was always to blame French air traffic control. Even if I was flying between Los Angeles and Hong Kong, and we had a delay, I would blame it on French air traffic control. And the passengers, bless them, most of them would sit there and go, "God, yeah, bloody French." Bloody French. Always on bloody strike, aren't they? French ATC are not the easiest people to work with. Now, you don't get to sit in the captain's seat of the 747 on the first day on the job, funnily enough. It's quite a long apprenticeship. It's about 15 years. It seems longer if you're flying with some of the captains that I had the pleasure of flying with over my formative years, shall we say. And it wasn't that long ago that the captain was literally the ultimate authority and God on that aeroplane. It's only recently that we have actually looked at what is called CRM or ARM, Crew Resource Management or Air Crew Resource Management. And this is something which I am actively involved with now, is teaching pilots the basic, what we used to call airmanship, which is not now taught. They call it human factors, but there's an awful lot more to it than that. Human factors come into it, and we have seen a couple of really, really serious accidents over the last 4 or 5 years. There was the Air France, which crashed between Rio de Janeiro and Paris. There was that tragedy in the Far East about 4 weeks ago now when an Airbus crashed into the sea off Java. There's another one this morning in Taipei, which nobody, I don't know what happened to that one yet. But this is, a lot of those are tied into what is called a CRM. Now, as I say, the captain used to be the god of the aeroplane. Rightly or wrongly, whatever he said was the law, and it went. There was a story of a mere mortal who had died, and he'd gone up to heaven, and he was waiting at the check-in desk with St. Peter doing the check-in procedures to go into heaven. And as he was waiting, he looked over St. Peter's shoulder, and he saw this creature in the background there with the 4 gold stripes, the wings, what have you. And he said to St. Peter, he said, "Excuse me," he said, "do all captains go to heaven?" St. Peter said, "Captains? No, no. Oh, no, no," he said, "that's God. He just thinks he's a British Airways captain." Now, I know that flying is not everybody's idea of fun these days, because we've got so much to contend with. Now, obviously, when you get on board your airplane, if you turn left, you're off to a good start. You are moving to a slightly nicer part of the aeroplane. You're headed for either business class or first class. If you turn right and you're into cattle class, it's not going to be that great a flight, guys. I really have to square with you on this one. Cattle class is not a great way to travel. There are worse ways to travel. You could be travelling on Ryanair cattle class, which is even worse then. But the further forward you sit, the better it becomes, seriously. Also, the more expensive it becomes. In the good old days, we used to be able to invite you up to the flight deck. Didn't we have the pleasure of a trip to the flight deck, maybe for the landing into Hong Kong even, which was always a great one to have. You could tell you bore your friends in the pub for months afterwards about sitting on the flight deck. Unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. So once you get to first class, sit there, enjoy. I like seeing you sitting in first class because basically you are paying my bonus for the year with all that money that you're paying to travel first class, which frankly is not worth it. Now, I'm sure you all share my love of going through security at airports. It is just such a lot of fun, and they're such wonderful people. They're humorous, they're witty, they're charming, and you know, they really, really make you feel wanted, that you are really, really making their day for them. Now, we have to go through the same as you, I'll tell you. And it is quite surprising when you think about it. When we go through security, some airports we have a dedicated crew channel, other ones we just have to go through exactly the same procedure as you. And they confiscate all exactly the same things from us as they confiscate from you, your nail file or your nail clippers. I used to carry one of these little Leatherman things around, you know, little multi-toolkit thing to tighten up things on the flight deck when they started falling off. Things like that, simple things like that. But obviously having that on my person on board the aircraft, I was going to take my Leatherman out and stab the first officer to death with it sometime during the course of the flight. So that had to go, and it was ceremoniously put in a plastic bag at the side of the security desk. At the end of the day, of course, all this is divvied up between the security staff, and you can buy it back on eBay within 24 hours. It's surprising, this, when you think about it. They remove all these lethal weapons from me at the same time as the engineers are fueling my aeroplane with up to 48,000 gallons of kerosene. 48,000 gallons. That's about 170 tons of fuel. Now that's an awful lot of fuel to be shoveling into an aeroplane. They're then going to give me the keys to the aeroplane, I will sign for it, and we will set off. They will put me in command of the biggest, most lethal, and legal weapon of mass destruction known to man. I can take off from Heathrow Airport, turn it around, head back to central London, and take it where I want, if I particularly want to. We don't do it often, I must admit. But the actual point of the story is exactly that. Why do they relieve me of all these silly little things when I could take the aircraft into, I don't know, Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, the city, Docklands, whatever, and do absolutely untold damage? It's a very worrying thing. Now, we as crew, we are generally very well behaved on board our aeroplane, okay? We don't get drunk on board, we don't sexually assault our cabin crew, we don't assault other passengers on board. We like passengers who are well behaved because it saves an awful lot of paperwork, honestly. And it becomes even more difficult for both you and me if we get intoxicated passengers on board an aircraft. Intoxication leads to certain patterns, changes to our patterns of behaviour. Going back to check-in. If you check in, the flight's overbooked. Uh-oh, the flight's late. God, am I going to make my meeting? Am I going to make my connection? My God, what's the weather like in Washington? Are you going to upgrade me if the flight's full? And then occasionally at check-in you'll hear that immortal line from otherwise normal people who say, "Do you know who I am?" To which the check-in staff will go on the radio, on the public address, and she will say, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I have a gentleman at check-in desk 12 who doesn't know who he is. If anyone knows who this gentleman is, could they possibly tell him, and we can get on with our day's work." As I say, we're usually very well behaved, but intoxication on board an aircraft is actually against the law. The Air Navigation Order, which is our Bible, which is what we work to, states no person shall enter any aircraft while drunk, nor be drunk in any aircraft. Now, assessing drunkenness is quite difficult, especially for the ground staff. You know, you can get somebody who's quite happy, but obviously had a few. Is he okay to travel? Is he going to keep drinking on board the aircraft? Is he going to be a problem? There is that potential for problems on board the aircraft. As this gentleman enjoys his flight and enjoys the hospitality of the line too much, he may become amorous with another passenger, perhaps. And it has happened. Now, Brian did ask me not to mention the Mile High Club. But I can see you're all dying to hear about the Mile High Club. Am I a member? Well, if I was, I wouldn't tell you anyway, I'll tell you. But we have when we have these passengers on board who get amorous, it's not actually against the law to indulge in a bit of rumpy-pumpy on the airplane. However, you will be charged with possibly other misdemeanors or crimes. Breach of the peace, or indecent behaviour, indecent assault or something. So they're going to have you, the cops, one way or the other. I've had drunks on board the aircraft. Some of them are just unbelievably drunk. They do not know what they're doing. And when you try and open the door when you're drunk, you'll be pleased to hear that you can't. Nobody can open those doors. Each door has got about 8 pounds per square inch of pressure pushing it into position, into its little plug. So that's about 12 tons of pressure you've got on your average side door. So it's not going to move. You can move that handle as much as you like. It is not going to move. But I was coming back from Singapore to London one lunchtime, and a passenger who boarded the aircraft in Sydney, he had boarded the aircraft in Sydney, he'd been giving it a bit of welly all the way up to Singapore, that's about 8 hours, transit in Singapore, back on board the aircraft for his flight to London. He proceeded to make a complete moron of himself on board the aircraft. He was walking up and down the aisle, he could barely walk actually, to be honest, but he was smoking as well. And the cabin crew was saying, "Excuse me, sir, you can't smoke on board the aircraft, you'll have to put that cigarette out, please." And so he said, "Oh, yes, I'll put the cigarette out," gets his cigarette and just flicks it up the cabin, lands on a passenger, bounces off onto the floor, cabin crew pick it up, put it in the waste bin, okay, end of story. But the chief steward phones me up to his captain, "We've got a bit of a problem in the cabin here. We've got a passenger who's completely out of control, he's highly intoxicated. We have got a passenger who has offered to help in this situation." And I said, "Well, hang on, just what exactly is happening?" And he said, "Well, the passenger is out of control, he is a danger to himself and others, but the gentleman who has offered to help, he is the captain of the London Metropolitan Police rugby football team." Who had been down in Australia playing coppers at rugby, and they were on their way back. Now, we wouldn't normally have any passengers involved in any domestic dispute within the cabin, but this was too good to turn down, wasn't it? So the chief steward said, "Do I have your authority to have the coppers take him down?" And I said, "Well, hang on, no, I'm coming down, I want to see this." So I gave control to the co-pilot, went downstairs, standing in the galley as the coppers were preparing themselves to take this guy down. And at the given signal, they just got him in a pincer. We put those plastic handcuffs on him, you know, those things you use to train your plants, those plastic things, round his wrist, threw him in a seatbelt on, and that was him. He lost consciousness. However, when we got to London, he was arrested by the police at Heathrow. He was up in front of Uxbridge magistrates the next morning. He went down for 8 months. 8 months inside for being drunk on board an aircraft. Now that to me is not long enough, to be quite honest. Now, psychologists tell us that people and aeroplanes don't really mix. The reason for this is that everybody has got apprehension about flying. Apprehension about flying. Not so much me, but everybody at some time has thought, how do those things stay up there? They weigh 400 tons, they've got 400 people on them, with no real visible means of support. Now what is actually going on here? I'm not sure. Trust me, it's safe. The laws of aerodynamics are not going to change sometime in the next, few hours or so. Are we environmental vandals to our planet? Yeah, yes we are. We are environmental vandals. We're not quite sure to what extent we are environmental vandals yet, but we are ploughing an awful lot of carbons into the atmosphere at high altitude. And this is what people don't know. We know the effect of carbons being emitted into the atmosphere at low levels from factories, power stations, but the stuff that goes into the upper atmosphere from our engines, nobody really knows yet, because it's only been around for the last, what, 30 years, 40 years that we've been flying high altitude stuff. The early days of the jet engines, you probably remember these, the early jets, they used to look as if they weren't burning kerosene or paraffin. It looked like they were burning nutty slack, with all the smoke that used to come pouring out of the back of the engines there, all the carbons that we used to throw out there. It's difficult to actually quantify what it is. Are pilots eccentric people? Are pilots control freaks? Of course we're control freaks. We have to be control freaks. That's what you pay us all that money for. It wouldn't work if we weren't control freaks. Seriously, would it? Pilots, I don't know if they're getting younger, like policemen or not, but even women nowadays, they get to fly airliners, don't they? Yeah, we do. We have the all-female crew, and as I said before, if it is an all-female crew, it's called the box office. And Continental Airlines was the first to fly the all-female crew. Don't worry, chaps, they're quite safe. Quite safe, most of them. Now, no, I'm not going into cycles or monthly times of the month or anything like that. No, not even for you. But prejudice infers that some people would prefer, Captain speaking here, to be testosterone fueled rather than progesterone or estrogen fueled. People still get the white knuckles when Captain Debbie Trouser Press comes on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Debbie Trouser Press, I'm your captain on the flight. And they all go, dong, and the knuckles all go like that on the seat rest. Very unfair, I think. What do I think of female pilots? I think they are every bit as good as their male counterparts. In some cases, they may possibly have had to prove even more than their male counterparts to get where they are today, because of this prejudice which has been levelled against females in the past. When Debbie Trouser Press comes on and introduces herself, she is one of about 5% of pilots who are female. That's all it is, right across the board, from private pilots all the way up to captains of jumbos, A380 super jumbos, 5%. And when I've got ladies in the audience, I always say to them, that's a pretty poor show, you know, girls. What's wrong with the job? Do you not like it? Part of the reason that girls don't go into flying, I think, is that when we start out learning to fly in a basic little training aeroplane, one of the exercises we have to do is in navigation. And this, to be able to navigate, you have to be able to map read. Now this always goes down well with the ladies on the audience. I usually have plants in the audience to hiss and boo when I say that, because, let's face it, map reading comes more naturally to some members of the human race than others. I also put their mind at rest by saying, you'll never ever have to do a hill start. You'll never have to do a 3-point turn on the taxiway. And, best of all, you will never, ever, ever have to reverse park your jumbo. And this, I think, is probably what frightens most people. We're not immediately visible to you, of course, so voices are important. So the question is, who would you rather be flown by? Would you rather be flown by, who shall we say, Dave Cameron, Tony Blair, or even Gordon Brown? Or would you rather have John Prescott? Or would you rather have Ken Livingstone flying you? You see, people actually project into voices and accents various traits. Now, the Scots generate great faith among their passengers. The Sean Connery brogue from Edinburgh is very reassuring, as is the Geordie accent, I understand. Brummies, not so much. I hate to say, Brummies do not generate vast amounts of confidence among their passengers. We still have the ultimate responsibility for your lives. Now, when it comes to safety briefings, do you listen to the safety briefing? Oh yes, yes, they say, oh yes, we do. I bet you do. I bet you sit there reading your Daily Telegraph or your Financial Times or Playboy or whatever it is, your choice of reading material. You really, really should. And I don't labour this too much, but the reason you should, especially the seatbelt briefing, I mean, it's not rocket science, is it, to say your seatbelt is fastened like this and unfastened by lifting the flap and pulling the ends apart. Yep, okay, got that. When they have recovered dead bodies from aircraft crashes in the past, strangely enough, they have found on the thumbs of passengers broken thumbs with the part of the flesh on that part of the thumb worn away. Because they have been conscious when the aircraft has come to rest. They have gone for their seatbelt, as they would in their car. They thought, I've got a seatbelt on here, I'll just reach that. And they're reaching out for that release thing at the side of their seatbelt there. And they wear away their thumb in desperation. Because in an emergency, your brain turns to mush. It really turns to mush. This is why, by listening to that safety briefing, that information goes into a part of the brain which is called the prefrontal cortex. And it's the short-term memory in your brain. Okay? And the information stored in there is available to you for a shorter period. Okay? Now, if I'm introduced to somebody today, I'll probably remember their name for the rest of the day. If I see them tomorrow, probably won't be able to recall their name, because it hasn't been transferred into long-term memory. And this is pretty much the same as happens in your briefing. So anything that is part of the briefing going into the short-term memory will be available to the brain to act on in the event of an emergency. The most important aspect, again, is the oxygen mask briefing, because when those masks drop down, depending on the altitude of the aircraft, your cabin is normally pressurized to about 8,000 feet. So it's a sort of average mountain that you're sitting on top of. When the aircraft depressurizes, the cabin is going to climb up to whatever altitude the aircraft is at. That might be 35, 36, 37, 38, 39,000 feet. At 35,000 feet, your time of useful consciousness is in the region of 15 seconds. 15 and 20 seconds. So that is why you have to get those masks, pull them on, put them on your face, get that little strap round you. And what else do they say? If you're travelling with a child, attend to your own mask first before attending to the child. Now, a mother's instinct would clearly be to protect her child first. But if she doesn't get her mask on, she is going to get to her time of useful consciousness. In other words, before the brain starts shutting down due to lack of oxygen, she is going to be useless to that child, and they are both going to perish. The Americans do wonderful cabin briefings. And when they were doing their oxygen mask briefing on one American, I think it was United I was on one night coming back across, the stewardess said, she was doing an oxygen briefing, and she said, if you're traveling with a child, make sure you attend to yourself first before attending to your child. If you're traveling with more than one small child, now would be an excellent time to run through in your mind which one you love the most. Which is true, of course. You know, it's a bit like Sophie's Choice. Remember that horrible film, that book and film, where the mother at the concentration camp had to decide which child was going to go that way and which child was going to go the other way. The other thing that I liked on that flight, they were doing the captain came on with his PA. And American pilots are so much better than British pilots at doing this. But you know, whatever his name is much better than Nigel. The captain came on and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're now cruising at 35,000 feet. The weather ahead's looking good tonight, so in a few minutes' time, I'm just going to go ahead and switch off the seatbelt signs. Shortly after that, we're going to be dimming the cabin lights. Maybe let you get some sleep during the night, enjoy the in-flight movie. But primarily, it's to enhance the appearance of your flight attendants." Here at the friendly skies of United, we do have some of the best flight attendants in the industry. Fortunately, none of them on this flight. Yes, we get bored on the flight deck. We like being bored. Honest, we do. We really do. We like being bored. When we have a call for doctors on board, we will almost invariably, with 400 people on board the aircraft, we will almost invariably have a doctor on board, strangely enough. Sometimes we have more than one. Sometimes they are fighting among themselves to get to a passenger when this call goes out. If there is a doctor on board, will he please make himself known to a member of the cabin crew? One night, it wasn't on my flight, but there were, I think, 8 or 10 thoracic surgeons on board when somebody suffered a cardiac arrest. They'd been to a conference somewhere, they were on their way home, and they were all desperate to get to this guy because, as a thank you from the airline for helping, you'll get an upgrade to first class the next time you fly. So they were sort of trampling each other in the rush to actually get to